So far, my points are simply these, that discussions about the sinless Jesus, or Jesus the Messiah, or Jesus taken into heaven, or faith and works, don't prove anything. They're not arguments that are going to lead somewhere. The complaint I have against Muslims is sometimes you let yourself be led around by the nose. Think! Don't just say, well, the man's an expert, I don't know. Think! It's not how much you know, it's what do you do with what you know, how much do you use your head. Even the Bible tells people, let's reason together. God says, come, let us reason together in the first chapter of Isaiah. Now, it is true that the Quran is very critical of some Jews and Christians. Not all, some Jews and Christians. The Quran is critical of them. In the third chapter of the Quran, the third surah, beginning about the 77th verse or ayah, it speaks of some among the Jews and Christians. It says, there is among them a group who distort the book with their tongues. You would think that it is part of the book, but it is no part of the book. And they say, that is from God, but it is not from God. It is they who tell a lie against God, and well they know it. Now the Muslim is familiar with this scripture. From his book, it says, look, some of the Jews and Christians lie about the contents of their book. They distort it. The Muslim has every reason to believe this is true when he just looks at what is offered in literature. He goes into a bookstore that sells Bibles and he finds out there's so many different versions. And if he looks carefully, he sees that the newer Bibles leave out some of the words that are in the older Bibles. And the newer Bibles have some words that aren't in the older Bibles. Something's going on that looks funny to him, and he thinks of this verse. Now, of course, someone is going to go away, many are probably going to go away, and say that I stood here and I insulted Bible translators because it's the translators of the Bible that do that. I'm not. I'll be happy to insult a few because they do this kind of thing. They're guilty of manipulation. But just as Jesus used to talk to a crowd of people, he told them what he wanted to tell them, and every so often he'd see someone in the audience, a Pharisee or somebody that was misleading the people, and he'd point him out and say, that one is a liar. He was not diplomatic. That's why he got into so much trouble from place to place. Because when he saw a liar, he pointed him out as such. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just showing you. If you speak harshly of someone, you're only following the example of Christ. He found that there was a time and a place to single out the people who led others into unbelief. You see, some translators of the Bible are honest, and they fight with their contemporaries over the proper translations to say, you've changed that, it should be this. They fight about it. Two of them, for example, are Goodspeed and Moffat, whose Bibles are printed under their own names because no church would back them up. They were too honest. As I said, the Quran is critical of some Jews and Christians. It says in the third surah that the Quran is furqan. In Arabic it means criterion. It explains in the third verse that the Quran is supposed to be used as the basis of judging which is true and which is false in their scriptures. It says in the fifth surah that the Quran reveals much of what the Jews and the Christians used to hide. Now, of course, the Jew and the Christian doesn't like to hear that. But they do quote some of the Quran back to the Muslim. But they do it badly, is what I'm trying to tell you. They quote it back badly in this way. They try to make it serve their purpose. There's no escaping it. The Quran says the Jews and the Christians hide things, they change things, and so on. So there's no sense in trying to find a verse somewhere to prove that, no, the Quran says that everything in the Bible is true. But that's what people do. In the fifth chapter of the Quran, they quote a verse, again if you excuse my Arabic, which says, وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. They quote this and it says, the translation is, speaking of the Quran that it is sent down to the Prophet, it says, and we sent down to you the book in truth, confirming that which they possessed of the book before. And you see, the Christian says, you see there, the Quran says the Bible is true. It says the Quran was sent down to confirm, to say it's truthful what they have in their book. That's what that sentence says if you stop there. but that's the middle of the sentence. There's two more words in the sentence. They are wa muhaiminan alaihi. You see, the whole text says, we have sent down the book in truth, confirming that which they had of the book before this, and as a watcher over it, their book. Muhaiminan is the Arabic word. Muhaiminan is an interesting word. It means quality control. You'd use a form of that word to designate the man in a factory who stands at the end of the assembly line and finds the rejects and throws them out. The whole text, that whole verse from the Quran says, the Quran confirms that which is truthful in their book, and it's the quality control agent. It's the thing that shows you which parts are not true. You don't fool a Muslim by quoting that if he goes and looks it up himself and realizes you only read half the sentence. It's a dishonest quote. Now, of course, some missionaries respond with great pain on their faces. They say to the Muslim, when the Muslim says, you have changed your scriptures, he says, oh, how can you say that? How could you as a Muslim change the Quran? You couldn't do that. How could I change the Bible? Well, the answer is very easy. Very easy. The Bible's not the same thing as the Quran, for at least three reasons. The Quran has always been in the hands of the people. Always. From the time of the Prophet, people wrote it down if they could write, and they memorized it and so on. It's always been in the hands of the people. Nobody ever disagreed on what were the contents. The Prophet died, his friends met, and they agreed by gathering all the writings they had said, this is the Quran, and nobody disputed it. Nobody said, no, you left something out. No, this doesn't belong. Nobody argued from the beginning. The Bible doesn't have that history. The Bible has been the property of the church, not the people. The first table of contents to the Bible that reads the same as the contents of the Bible now dates from the year 367. More than 300 years after Jesus, finally they decided which books belong in the Bible. That's point one. Point two, the Bible is in dead languages. The Quran is in a living language. 120 million people speak Arabic, the language of the Quran. The Bible is written in ancient Hebrew, ancient Aramaic, and ancient Greek, which nobody speaks. A handful of scholars know it. So that to change it is an easy thing if you're a translator, to read one thing and tell somebody something else. That's easy. Third point, there has never been so much as a letter in dispute about the Quran. No one has even so much as said, this letter is wrong in your copy of the Quran, unless it's a misprint. But nobody ever disputes, no, it should be this, it should be that, and we have a battle over it. Whereas the Bible has come down from many, many manuscripts. Any Bible that's worth buying is filled with footnotes. Almost every page will have a footnote. So you read the verse, footnote. Read down here, it says, or this verse might be, and it gives you an alternate translation, or what some other manuscript says. So when somebody says, I mean, it's a shallow argument if somebody says, look, Muslims can't change the Quran, how could Christians change the Bible? It's because they're two different kinds of things.